Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Madison Realty Capital, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, AmTrust Title, Ariel Property Advisors, Customers Bank, Capital One Bank, Meridian Capital Group. Additional funding has been provided by grants from AVR Realty Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Colliers International NYC, Collins Building Services, CPEX Real Estate Services, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handler Real Estate Organization Handro Properties, Hodges Ward Elliott INC, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Castamatidis Red Apple Group, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Matone Group, Mercantile Bank, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Group, SJP Properties, Stonehenge NYC, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Merengoff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Organization, Moynihan Capital Partners, and these friends. The Bronx, New York. Okay, public school, junior high school. I want to be a lawyer. I'm going to go to, I'm going to be a babysitter. I'm going to be a house sitter. I'm going to see what the Hamptons are. I'm going to go to camp, day camp, Binghamton, okay, London. Oh, I got to go to Brooklyn Law School. Narcotics? It's not a place for a Jewish girl to be a narcotic officer from the DA. Marriage management? Sterling Risk? Sterling Analytics? I have the COO of Sterling Risk and the president of Sterling Analytics and also the founder and the creator of Marriage Management?
Yes, all three.
Okay, all three. I have Marci Waterman. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's go back to Dad's side of the family. Tell me about when they arrived and tell me about Dad and Mom, okay?
My grandparents, Max and Rose Silverman.
Who we have a picture of.
Yes, they emigrated in the early 1900s. My grandma was from Poland. My grandpa was from Romania. My grandfather was about 15 years old. His whole family had emigrated little by little to America, once one after the other.
Yeah.
He lands probably around 1909, and he goes into a sweatshop. And there he meets my grandmother.
Who's also working as a piecemeal person.
Exactly, in the sweatshop. And they get married while they're in the sweatshop. And my grandfather, once all the regulations start coming down, the sweatshops start closing, he goes to a cousin and starts to learn how to be a fruit man.
So he's a fruit peddler.
Fruit peddler, the Lower East Side.
And then?
And then he, with his entrepreneurial spirit, he winds up owning the fruit stand and selling soup and greens for 5 cents. And he and my grandmother have 3 kids, 2 daughters and my father. My father was born in 1928.
Right.
And he is the youngest by far. They live in the Bronx their whole life. They wind up moving to Longfellow Avenue and then Walton Avenue.
That's your father?
My father.
Right.
My mother's parents, my Poppy Benny and my grandma Florence Kirschenbaum, they were born in America. Their parents came from Europe, but they were born in America. They get married.
How'd they meet?
They met on a blind date.
Ooh, yes.
My grandmother was a secretary. My Poppy Benny was a bookkeeper. They lived in the Bronx, Garden Street, when they got married. They had my mom, 2 years after my mom, they had my mom's sister, Sue Ray. My mom was a secretary. She graduated high school and then went to secretarial school to support the family and became a secretary on Fifth Avenue, which was a dream of hers at that time.
Right.
My dad was driving a cab. He had served in the Korean War in Germany, and he was driving a cab and putting himself through cosmetology school because he thought that would be a good way to meet girls. He meets my mom on a blind date. They get married in 1955, and they move again. They move in the Bronx to Kingsbridge, where they have my sister in 1960, and they have me in 1968.
But Dad has an interesting career, and he's running a beauty parlor,
Yep.
okay, a salon.
Two salons,
Two
actually.
salons. But Dad, later on in life, what happens? He changes.
He has a silent heart attack. And you have to remember, back then, being in a beauty parlor with the door shut and all the aerosol and smoking 3 packs a day, not very good. So he has a silent heart attack and does a quick pivot, sells 2 beauty parlors, and decides to go back to teach cosmetology in a vocational high school. And that becomes his new career.
Now, Mom also went back to school, right?
Yes, at 45 years old, my mom, who never got to go to college, went back to college, Herbert Lehman College in the Bronx. She went back at 45 years old. She graduated summa cum laude and decides that she's going to be a secretary, but with a pension, goes back to a high school. What high school? The same high school as my dad. So my mom and dad went to work for the next 20 years together. Every morning drove to work at a vocational high school in the Bronx.
Were they still living at the Nathan Hale house?
Still living in the Nathan Hale houses, and they both retired in 1993 and went down to Florida, where they are now.
Okay. So let's talk about their daughter. So tell me about growing up in the Bronx, because I know there's a great story about you and the principal. Okay, and we have a
Yes.
picture of the principal. So why don't you tell me about Mom taking you to school and public school?
Well, I'll tell you, I had an idyllic childhood, what I believed was an idyllic childhood. I never realized that we were poor. I never realized that we lived in low-income housing. I never realized that there was anything wrong with the way I lived. I had
There
a
was
great life.
nothing wrong.
There wasn't anything wrong.
You were happy.
We lived, and I'm the smallest in my family. I'm 5'8", and I'm the smallest person in my family. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. We shared a common wall. We had 1 bathroom. We drove a Toyota Celica, driving like this in a hatchback. But my life was fantastic. My dad took me to school every single morning.
Right, he would walk you to school.
On the way to his beauty parlor, past my school, PS7, and I was skipped as a young child.
So what happened? I mean, you know, there were these programs called SP.
Yes.
But you were skipped at the age of 7. I think there was something with the New York Times. Or
Yes. So in kindergarten, I went to kindergarten, came home the first day of school crying. And I told my mom that they're making me hang my coat in a cubby and they're using finger paints. And I wanted out. So my mother took me to the principal, Milton Fine, and he basically said, okay. He took out the New York Times and he said, big shot, start reading. And I started to read.
How do we have the picture of you and Milton?
Because he was always a huge proponent of me throughout my entire elementary school career.
Now, were you the tomboy?
I was a tomboy. I was my dad's son, yes, going bicycle riding, playing paddleball, doing cross country with my dad. But Mr. Fine always needed a poster child for something, and I was his poster child. But he was influential in my mother's life, too. He is the one who encouraged my mother to go back to school.
And you don't go to the 1st grade, you go to the 2nd grade?
I went to the 2nd grade, and then my mother pulled me back into the 1st grade.
So they were going to advance you 2 years.
2 years. But my mother, who is a very smart lady, said that my social development would lag behind my intellectual development, and she wanted me to fit in.
So let's talk about public school, and then we'll talk about junior high school, because you had some interesting jobs, and you learned some interesting trades, as they would say. Tell me about it.
Well, I went to work with my dad at the beauty parlor every single Saturday. I would do whatever it takes, whether it was sitting at the cash register or washing people's hair or sweeping up hair on the floor.
The only thing is you didn't have the cigarette like your dad and the rest
No.
of the people. Okay?
No.
You know, at the beauty parlor, oh.
Exactly, and everybody was smoking back then at all times. Even when you were getting your nails done, the manicurist had a cigarette in her mouth. So I worked with my dad on Saturdays. I babysat since I was 8 years old. Then in junior high school, I would go door to door and sell candy for extra money. Then in high school, I had 2 small jobs, babysitting and doing weekend tutoring.
How'd you learn about the Hamptons? I mean, you were a kid from the Nathan Hale homes, Mitchell Lammer in the Bronx. How'd you find out about the famous Hamptons?
Well, I had never known about the famous Hamptons. I had read a book once by Judy Blume that talked about the Hamptons, so there was a vague recollection of this place. However, my dad used to do the hair of some women from Riverdale, and one of them mentioned that their daughters was going to be a mother's helper in the Hamptons. So I had gone to a summer camp for over 8 years. My sister wasn't going back to camp. It was called Camp Tranquility, and it was very tranquil. It was in Earlton, New York, and my father and mother said, you know what, maybe you should try babysitting out in the Hamptons. So I went to an agency, and I was recruited by every single person that I wanted to go babysit for, because I had had this wonderful babysitting dossier, and I went out to the Hamptons, and I never left. Every summer, that's where I went, except for traveling to London.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that in a second. So you were a helper, okay, mother's helper. And then you got involved with like estate watching? What is estate watching?
So once again, I went back to this agency after being a mother's helper for 3 years, and I wanted a different family at that point. So I went back to the agency, and I knew at this point what I was looking for in a family and in kids and ages. And I happened upon somebody who put the wrong name in the agency because they had grown kids. And what the job actually was estate watching. So I got to stay on this magnificent estate and oversee the cook and the groundskeeper and the botanist and the housekeepers. And my only job was to really make sure that I picked up my boss at the airport on Fridays, drove him back on Sundays, and made sure that the dinner plans for the house were all settled. It was an ideal job.
So where'd you go to high school?
John F. Kennedy High School in the Bronx.
Right.
Escalators, elevators,
and
magnometers when you walked in to make sure you weren't carrying.
So how do you end up going to Binghamton?
Well, as I said, we didn't have much money, and state schools were a great option then. So my mom had said to me, you can apply to 3 schools, Harvard, Yale, and Binghamton.
Now, you said to me, which I failed to bring out, that when you were a little kid, you decided that you wanted to be a lawyer. What was the spark that created this, that you wanted to become a lawyer?
I am the youngest in my family. My sister's 8 years older than I am. And everything was always a debate in my house. If you didn't speak up and have a really good argument, you would always be the youngest. And I was the youngest. So I learned how to debate very early on. Math was not a strong suit, so I went with what I could do. And that was talk and talk and talk. And I knew from the very beginning I wanted to be a lawyer. The thing was, what kind of lawyer? I always knew I wanted to be a prosecutor.
Not many people say I want to be a prosecutor. And, you know, I said to you, maybe it was Perry Mason. You said no.
I can't pinpoint it, but I always make sure that I championed right. And I felt that being on that white horse in the DA's office, making sure that you sought justice, not just put somebody who's a bad person or did something terrible in jail, but really sought justice, was what spoke to me.
So you knew that when you were at Binghamton, you were going to go to law school?
Yes, always.
Okay, so you graduated Binghamton what year?
1989.
And how do you decide on Brooklyn Law School?
Well, they always say there are law schools that churn out different types of lawyers. There's the Ivy Leagues that turn out philosophers and writers, and then there are the gritty New York law schools that turn out litigators. And I wanted to be a litigator. So I applied to a bunch of schools in New York. I got into Brooklyn.
They gave you some money?
They offered me some money, which is always a very good thing. And that's where I went and loved it.
The girl from the Bronx, now going to Brooklyn, were you living in Brooklyn at this time?
Well, I was living in the Bronx. And then my mom and dad decided to move and to go down to Florida. And I had to hustle and figure out where I was going to live. So I made some friends and I slept on some couches. until I was able to find my own way in Brooklyn, and I moved into my own apartment with a friend in Brooklyn.
You have 2 years in between law school, and we're going to get to how you got to the prosecutor's office. So 1 year you end up in London, you said to me.
Yes. I always loved London. I had traveled through Europe my first year of, after I graduated college. I took the summer and I traveled backpack through Europe with my best friend. And I just was mystified by London. Everything about it. I became an Anglophile, which I was taunted by my parents for some time because I would walk around talking about being an Anglophile. And the first opportunity I had, I put in some applications to work with the Queen's Counsel at the Inns of Court in London, and they were thrilled to have an intern who would work for free. And then once I got in, I asked if my best friend could join, and they said sure. And we went over to London. I lived with somebody that I had done some babysitting for. I lived with that family and interned for the summer in London with a barrister.
Tell me about how the New York District Attorney and you helped you get into the DA's office.
Well, we started applying for jobs. Everyone applies for jobs after their second year. And I had already taken a class called Trial Advocacy with somebody who wasn't the district attorney, because everybody waits in Brooklyn Law School for the DA to actually teach the class. But it was already my second year. He hadn't taught it, so I took it and I received an A. And then in the beginning of my third year, he taught the class. So I audited it. I just sat in through the class. And at the very last class, on the very last day, somebody didn't show up for the final. So the DA, Charlie Hines, said to me, "Silverman, why don't you come down, take the role of the defense attorney?" And I, of course, said, "I didn't receive any of the paperwork. I'm auditing your class." And he said, "I'll give you a few minutes to review." I reviewed. I did a good job. And at the end of the class, everyone slowly gets up because they're waiting for the DA to call their name to maybe say, "I'll see you soon." And everyone leaves, and he says, "Silverman, come down. I need to talk to you." And I said, "What is it, sir?" And he said, "Looks like I'll be seeing you in September." And sure enough, that's how I got into the DA's office.
So September starts, and in the DA's office. But how does the Bronx girl get involved with the narcotics division of the DA's office?
Well,
I mean, there are other divisions in the DA.
Lots of other divisions. And what I was hoping to do was to go right to a trial bureau. But they gave an option to go to the appeals bureau, which is where you actually just sit behind a computer and you write appeals. You learn the case law, you write appeals. And nobody wanted to do that. But I decided that I thought that would be the best thing for me for long term, because I thought I'd be the best litigator I could be if I actually learned the law behind what I was litigating. So I went to the DA's office appeals bureau for a year. And then when I graduated from that, every single one of the bureau chiefs gets to choose which of the newbies they want in their bureau. And I was chosen to be in major narcotics. Pat Gatling, who's the head of major narcotics at the time, got first choice. She chose me. And that started my narcotics career.
You spent, 9 years in narcotics?
Almost a decade, yes. The best job ever. Nothing like it. You have to understand, you get woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning. You get picked up by an undercover car with an undercover cop with a full SWAT team inside. They put you in a flak jacket. They take down the door with a battering ram. They make the scene safe. You go in, you then photograph the scene, you collect evidence, you then debrief anyone who wants to be a confidential informant. You then are up for 48 hours doing videotapes of the defendants. It is the most exciting, it's Law and Order, but in real life. That's exactly what it was. Nothing better.
What happens after 9 years?
I get pregnant with twins. And that doesn't stop me. I work till I'm 37 weeks pregnant. Huge, absolutely huge. Judge Tomboy in Brooklyn Supreme, after a certain point, wouldn't even let me into his courtroom because he thought I'd actually go into labor in his courtroom. But I worked till I was 37 weeks pregnant on trial and went on maternity leave for a little while. And it was just too much. You couldn't be the kind of prosecutor that I was, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
And also have twins.
And have twins. You're dividing attention in half to begin with.
So what happens then? Then you become a stay-at-home mom?
I become a stay-at-home mom, But I'm a workhorse. So I become very active in the New York charity scene.
Right, but how do you get involved with WIZO?
Well, I go to a luncheon and I hear Evelyn Summer, who is the president of WIZO Worldwide. WIZO is Women's International Zionist Organization. And I just break down in tears and I realize that that's my calling, is to help indigent women and children and the elderly and the disabled in Israel. And that's what I should be doing. I should be raising money and helping kids and families in Israel. And I become the president, the local president, after a few years of work in WIZO, New York. And that was the most wonderful, rewarding time I ever had. But I still was craving work.
Right, but how do you get involved with the divorce? You were a narc agent. You weren't a matrimonial specialist.
No, but that best friend that I referenced, that I had gone to Europe backpacking with, and then to London to intern with the barrister, owned her own divorce company, divorce firm. And I asked her if I can start working for her, to come in a few hours a week and do some work. And she said, sure. So I pick up on it very quickly. But I see there's a huge disparity with women and men and divorce. I reckon that there would be some disparity, but I didn't realize how uneven the playing field actually was. So I stopped working for my girlfriend and I start my own company called Marriage Management.
And what is Marriage Management?
It is a divorce strategy company, but it's very under the radar. Now, after speaking to you, it's not so under the radar anymore, but all of my clients come to me via referral. And what it does is it helps women, and women only, strategize to understand.
Now I'm going to create male management, Marriage Management.
Sure. They have plenty of representation already, but it helps women kind of navigate what the playing field is going to look like if and when they ever do get divorced. And I am not a proponent of divorce in any way, shape, or form. That's why it's called marriage management. The goal is to manage your marriage.
So how do you then get in marriage management with bills, legal analytics?
Well, you have a wonderful way to go from one thing to the other. In marriage management, one of the things I was doing was looking at legal bills, looking at the women's legal bills and seeing where there were egregious charges or unethical charges, and then giving them the information and the knowledge to either go back to their attorneys or to have me go back to their attorneys to explain why the bill was not the way it should be. And I happened to be on a vacation, and a client mentioned to a friend, Mona Sterling, that this is what I do. Mona tells her husband, David Sterling. David Sterling has a company called Sterling Analytics, who...
They have Sterling Risk.
Sterling Risk, which is a national insurance brokerage, one of the largest privately held insurance brokerages in the country. And Sterling Analytics is a small part, a child of the parent company that looks at legal bills. So David, hearing that I do this, asks me if I'd come into the company and consult with Sterling Analytics. And I say, sure. And he brings me out to Woodbury, Long Island. I spend the day. On my car ride home, he asks if I want the job. And I ask, what job? And he says, I'd like you to come in and be the managing director of Sterling Analytics.
So what does Sterling Analytics do today? You look at legal bills.
I look at legal bills, yes. We are a team of over 40 attorneys, and we do a line-by-line analysis of legal bills with clients as huge as Chubb and Walmart, and as small as somebody who has a $1,000 bill from their lawyer that they think that shouldn't be paid $1,000 for that work. And we actually do a line-by-line review.
And how do you charge?
We charge by a percentage of what we review, not by what we save, because the savings can be 50% of the bill.
Right.
So it's just a point or so of what we review.
So how do you go from marriage management to Sterling Analytics to Sterling Risk, to become the COO of Sterling Risk?
Well, Sterling Analytics was pretty small, and the revenue was pretty small, and we had 3 attorneys working for us. In a matter of years.
Now it's 40.
Now it's 40. It's a lot more profitable than it was. And we put in a ton of efficiencies, great teamwork, tremendous collaboration, always leading with integrity, care, respect. And David liked the way I ran my small team and wanted to bring those efficiencies into the parent company. And that's how I became COO of Sterling Risk.
So let's talk about the kids.
We have a very big family together. My kids are David and Kayla. They're 20 years old. My son's at University of Denver, Michigan.
He's the hockey player.
Yes.
Daughter's at Wolverine Country.
Yes, Michigan. Go Blue. And the love of my life is my fiance, Marcelo. And together we have 5 children, ages 13 to 30. Charlie, Benny, and Adam. So there's only one girl, the princess, Kayla.
Okay, besides the princess, let's talk about this princess. You've been involved with certain charities recently besides WEZO,
Yes.
the American Heart.
American Heart Association. We were very lucky to be honored by Go Red. Sterling Risk was called out as a corporate honoree, and I was able to represent them because of our heart-healthy options and solutions that we offer in the workplace, especially for women.
So I think it was propitious that Mom took you to the principal, and the principal saw something, and that what he saw is continued to today. And I'm very happy that you were my guest today on Building New York Stories.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.